definitely helped me learn more about what I want to do in the future, what my
Yeah.
long-term goals are. And it's just as important to learn about what you don't want to do as what you do want to do. So again, it comes down to taking every experience with a grain of salt and making the most of it.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the TAKAGAI family. My name is Taka, and through this platform, I encourage college students to cultivate a positive growth mindset alongside with guest speakers who come from all walks of life. And this week, today, I'm very happy to have Yousef Abbas joining us from Chicago in the US, all the way. He's currently working as a controls engineer in automated driving at General Motors. And it's always really inspiring to see a fellow Boilermaker hustling out in industry. He's a fellow graduate from Purdue University in electrical engineering. So Yousef, thank you for joining us today and a warm welcome.
Thank you, Taka. I appreciate the warm welcome. Really great to be here, and as always, boiler up. So
I haven't heard that one in a while.
yeah, it's been
But
some time, hasn't it? So
exactly. Yeah. And
let's
just
get
for
started. Go
sorry, just for everyone's reference, we'll be covering some of the key topics today. It's very gonna be very interesting. It's going to be in the areas of automated driving, electric charging stations, basically things around the future of electric vehicles and automated driving and so on, as well as some of the soft skills such as communication, relationship building, and relationship management. So if any of these topics sound interesting to you, stay tuned and yeah, very excited to hear about your experiences, Yusuf.
Yep, absolutely. So, um, so do you want me to address why I chose electrical engineering first?
Yeah, let's go. Let's go with that.
Okay, perfect. So, when I got my acceptance to Purdue back in 2015, I was
Mhm.
admitted to the first year engineering program, and around that time, I can't say I had a super definitive idea of what I wanted to study exactly. Um, After going through some of the information sessions, I realized that I didn't really have a super clear idea of what I wanted to do in the future, but I knew that there were a
Mm.
few industries of interest in automotive, aerospace, and technology very broadly. Um, but in that sense, I wanted to do something that was broad,
Yeah.
offered a good outlook for the future. And in that sense, I chose electrical engineering just because it had a lot of overlap with computer, and at Purdue, it's actually grouped into ECE. There were many different areas in computer controls, semiconductors, and just generally, it was quite broad. I really believe with any engineering degree, you can pursue anything you really want if you
Mm.
actively go out and gain those technical skills. But um, other than that, the fact that it's quite broad, had a good outlook, there wasn't too much other to the um, factors that played into my choice to pursue electrical engineering. So really it comes down to the curriculum and what you think you can get out of it. So that was the
Interesting.
basis for choosing to pursue EE at Purdue.
Gotcha, gotcha. That's interesting you mentioned that, Yusuf, because when I also entered, obviously I went through the same thing, first year engineering, and then I decided to, I was pretty set on aerospace,
Mhm.
but then over time I realized that my interests are quite vague, or let's say in general.
Yeah,
But I do agree that the core skills that you gain during your time in college, especially in engineering, is widely applicable. Things like problem solving, analytical, having an analytical mindset, and so on. So
100%.
very broad skill set that you can gain for sure.
Yep, totally agree with that.
Awesome. And I'm very curious to see a lot of students, once they graduate with a bachelor's degree, quite a few students also decide to pursue a master's. And for me, what's really curious is to understand the motivation and why people pursue masters in different areas or maybe similar areas. For you, you decided to pursue a master's in applied mathematics at Johns Hopkins. First of all, congratulations. And what was your sort of decision-making process?
Yeah, so as I got into some of the latter coursework in my EE career at
Mm.
Purdue, I found an interest in signal processing and time sampling techniques, and an interest in probabilistic methods. And so both of those are quite general, a lot of different opportunities to find application for those topics in the industry. And currently with my role as a sensor fusion controls engineer, um, that is something I'm not personally doing. It's more on some of the advanced side of the work, but it is an area of interest that I'd like to further explore. One of the things I realize is that as I progress with my career, I'm quite confident and sure that I would like to go more into a managerial role,
Oh,
and not
okay.
necessarily advanced technical work in engineering.
Mhm.
And so I really believe that a master's degree or any sort of master's or higher education should either further your current study or your current work,
Sure.
or allow you to branch into another field. As I mentioned, the curriculum for any program is super important, and I believe this program gives me a lot of flexibility. I want to understand how I can solve probability problems, apply statistical software confidently, and then just learn more about computational sciences in mathematical modeling, and in my case, at the moment, controls, but perhaps learn some of the fundamental concepts of data science as well, which is an upcoming field. So that's
Absolutely.
kind of the reason for choosing this specific degree, as well as this specific program. It just offered me that flexibility, um, and is allowing me to advance those areas of interest that I've identified through both academia and work.
Interesting, interesting. So thinking from that perspective, you're currently a controls engineer, that like you mentioned in automated driving, and you mentioned you're working on sensor fusion. From my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's effectively a combination of camera, lidar, and radar, and sort
Mhm.
of integrating all those aspects in order to come up with a holistic system. Is that kind of the right spectrum?
Yep, that's exactly what sensor fusion is. My role is ever so slightly different.
Mm,
Um, a lot of the more senior engineers that have completed their masters have been working in this domain, develop more of the sensor fusion algorithms, whereas my work in the control side is to say based on X, Y, and Z parameters,
mm.
and upper management's desire to implement these new safety features in automated driving and advanced driver assist systems. How can we take these sensor fusion algorithms, and then basically um, use those inputs that are cleaned up to achieve a certain level of functionality with these new desired functions that upper management has requested. So it's a lot of iterated testing, Simulink modeling, software in the loop testing. So a pretty broad and holistic role, really depends on what's going on day to day, what projects come onto my table.
Gotcha, gotcha. And oh, that's very interesting. And I think a lot of people, especially for me, I was a little bit confused at the beginning, the difference between automated and autonomous. And upon doing some research, it does turn out that the main distinction between those two is the level of human intervention that's required.
Correct.
For autonomous, it's, you have the five levels, let's say in general, the
Hmm.
level in which you have full autonomy at the top, where you basically don't need any, it's driverless assistance, and the car can basically operate on its own. Whereas automated driving, you still do need a fair amount of human assistance, let's say. So you are working specifically in this particular domain, correct?
Yes, I'm working in automated driving, so I'm not working on entirely autonomous mobility, but
Mm,
essentially features to supplement any driver's interaction on the road in the vehicle, and then also for safety features as well. So I think active safety and automated driving really do go hand in hand, um, and having that level of functionality, while parallel to that you have full autonomous capability being developed, is quite important as well.
gotcha, gotcha. And how different is that from your work you did as a design release engineer? Could you maybe walk us through that
Yeah,
main
no,
difference?
100%. So it is, so that my personal work is
Mm,
very, very different. As a
okay.
design release engineer, I was working on the design and release of the video processing module. So essentially, um, that was my first role that I had in my professional career, and it was an opportunity for me to understand the engineering release process. So when you're working in a company, as large as my current employer,
Mm,
essentially, especially in the automotive industry, um, and then even more so, especially while you're working remote. In such a complicated setting where there are so many different facets of a company that are coming together to integrate all of their different components into one fully designed, integrated, and tested machine.
Sure.
um, there is a lot of intermediary roles that have to account for quality assurance, and then someone who is really responsible for a certain part. So, as my first role as a design release engineer, essentially what I did was, for this specific part, the video processing module, I had to
Mhm.
make sure that for each specific vehicle it was going to be integrated and it was tested. So I was, I'd speak with validation. I would speak with the engineers who would personally design the solution, and then essentially when it was ready to be released, the software was ready to be sent to the factory to be flashed onto the controllers. I would basically put my signature on it saying that verified it, everything looks good.
Oh,
And if it didn't pass validation, I'd be the one to send it back. Now, it wouldn't be like one specific vehicle I'm responsible for, as vehicles have different trim, different package options. So, based on all of those, there'd be different calibrations, as the body dimensions would be ever so different. So, essentially, you could think of it as a program manager for a set of vehicles for a specific part. Um,
oh.
that's in a nutshell what that role was. So really valuable for understanding the timeline, the release process, the iterative validation and calibration process. Really gave me a holistic overview of what that engineering development process looks like for production vehicles.
Gotcha. That's amazing. And you mentioned a holistic overview. I think working specifically, it sounds like working in as a design release engineer, you were able to, well, let's say you were sort of forced to interact with the various stakeholders, whether that's quality assurance, the validation engineering, or the actual engineer design engineers themselves.
Yep.
And so I feel like that's kind of that program management aspect is what you're probably looking for in the future moving forward, and especially in a managerial role.
Yep. Yeah, and I'm not sure when I'm ready to make that jump.
Mm,
We'll see what happens in the future, but
yeah.
I think one of the biggest takeaways was that when I first started at and with my current employer, I was unsure of whether or not I wanted to do that. I wasn't sure what the future would have in store for me, and I was quite frankly a little bit frustrated in the beginning that I studied electrical engineering, semiconductor physics, embedded systems, all these different things, only to come in and be working in Excel. But I realized quite quickly over the course of those couple of months that there was a lot to be learned. Just had to
Mm.
approach it with an open mindset, and then really get the most out of every opportunity you're presented with. As there's always something to gain, something to learn, and I think setting goals for yourself in that regard and knowing what you're getting into is also very important.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I think that's great you mentioned that idea of having a set target, but at the same time being flexible and being open to all kinds of opportunities and adventures that you might have
Mhm.
not expected on your, let's say, general vision that you had. And I think being open-minded is one of the key skills that actually a lot of people might think it comes naturally to different people, like yourself, Yusuf. But for me personally, I think it is a develop skill that is, if you put in the time and effort, you are able to develop that skill to be open-minded. So for those listening, I highly encourage you to at least be aware that it is a skill that is developable. So
Yep, no, 100%. There's something to gain everywhere. So, gotta just approach each opportunity with a grain of salt and an open mind.
absolutely, and I also appreciate that your honesty on the fact that you transition from using very technical tools, but now as a program management, the tool that you use, let's say, is relatively simple and simplistic, like the Excel, but the other dimensions surrounding the tool, interacting with different stakeholders, how do you communicate technical concepts to a non-technical person and stuff like that, I think is very are intangible skills that you can
Mhm.
learn along the way
Yeah,
as well. So I want to quickly switch to a little bit about your experience working with electric charging stations. I
sure.
know you worked at Kimley Horn, I think, which is you worked in Chicago, correct?
Mhm.
And yeah, so just for the audience, it's one of the largest, let's say, planning and design engineering consultancy. So I want to dig into that bit of your experience, Yousef. So walk us through, you mentioned you were designing power system schematics for Volta electric charging stations, which I think is a very exciting company. Talk us through that experience.
Yeah, so essentially what that experience was is, as Taka mentioned, I worked at this design and consultancy engineering firm, Kimley Horn.
Mm,
Having no prior experience in that domain, it was, quite a task to really learn, come on board, and have the opportunity to contribute in a 10-week internship time span.
right.
Um, but that said, basically what this opportunity with the electric charging stations entailed was Volta was one of our clients at Kimley Horn. So them, along with Walgreens, said, okay, we want to have Volta electric charging stations, and we need to have the power system design done, and we need to have a team of civil engineers make sure that the actual connection from the circuit breakers all the way out to the charging station in the parking lot are going to be meeting all of the required specifications and standards, put in
Mm,
place by the Department of Transportation.
right.
Um, so, that said, my work was basically just a series of calculations, laying out the power system schematics, and then validating that everything met the criteria. But it wasn't, the most glamorous work. I really did have to learn a lot, had
Yeah.
the iterative process. But as far as my thoughts on this opportunity, I think it really showed me another side of electrical engineering that many don't get to see in planning, design, and power. I think one of the more niche things nowadays is working in technology,
Mm,
um, which still has tons of opportunity, but it showed me that there is more opportunity beyond what I would actively see on LinkedIn and other areas as well. So
yeah.
that was kind of my perception of it. As far as the actual opportunity, definitely helped me learn more about what I want to do in the future, what my
Yeah.
long-term goals are, and it's just as important to learn about what you don't want to do as what you do want to do. So again, comes down to taking every experience with a grain of salt and making the most of it.
Superb advices. Yeah, these are the things that I would love the world to, especially the college students who are out there, to really internalize the advices that you just gave. I think being open and yeah, it's wonderful advices here. So thank you, Yousef. I want to switch into the soft skills side. So let's talk about a bit about communication and relationship management.
Mhm.
Um, when you worked in GM, for example, as a controls engineer or
Sure.
in design as a design release engineer, you mentioned you had to communicate, with different stakeholders. How do you go about communicating technical concepts to somebody or upper management or somebody who's less familiar with the subject matter?
Yeah, so I think in a nutshell, two very simple pieces of advice. Number
Mhm.
one, know your audience, know who you're talking to. And then I would say the second piece of advice is, in one word, simplify. I think that everyone should be proactive in their preparation. So, have the technical details down, have everything ready to go. So be very proactive in your preparation.
Mm,
But in the event that someone wants more detail, well, then you can be reactive in your response to providing them that detail. So have it on hand, but in this, just the general answer, be succinct in your response, be very clear, cut, and just give them what they're looking for. And then you can provide more detail as needed. So
yep, yep.
that's, I know that's a very short answer, but um, the last thing you want is to have a presentation droning on, and someone asks you, all right, so what's the answer?
Yeah, absolutely.
From
I
personal
can,
experience.
especially with, now everyone, a lot of us are working from home, probably most of us, and people are always on some sort of video conference call and meetings, and especially for the upper management people, they have limited, let's say, time to concentrate and get specific tangible results and be able to communicate with the different stakeholders. So from that perspective, I think what Yusuf said makes sense. Being able to understand, okay, who are you talking to, number one, and then making sure you answer the question, I think is very important. I think for me as well during internships, at the beginning, I tend to forget that. which was interesting because it's actually quite a simple thing. But when you've put so much time and effort into, this big project that you're so proud of working on for the first time, you want to talk about everything from the details. From a manager standpoint, they just want to know the answer to the question. So very strong point here. When you manage your relationships with your peers at GM, for example, or your managers at work, especially now everything's online, how do you go about that relationship management aspect?
Yeah, absolutely. So at the end of the day, any relationship you have is going to be built on trust.
Mm,
And I think with trust, the foundation for trust is good, clear communication.
mhm,
Understanding someone else's viewpoints, or being empathetic, um, and then making sure that you are proactive and really setting expectations. Obviously the individuals you interface will be different. In my day-to-day work, I have a couple engineers I work with on my specific team that almost serve as mentors, a couple of stakeholders on other teams that work parallel to me, that are
mm,
just as important in the process, that I have to learn, I have to meet, that may not have interfaced with me and might have a different personality. Oh, excuse me. Um, Especially working remotely, not seeing each other day to
yeah,
day in person, it definitely makes it difficult if you're coming onto a new team. But ultimately, being proactive in introducing yourself, managing expectations,
mm,
actively going out of your way to learn, and then also, especially with my manager, I try to make sure that, regardless of how busy he gets, we have time every couple weeks to sit down, just touch base on where we're at, my progress, any new goals he wants to add. So really just being proactive and managing and setting expectations. So I'd say, in a nutshell, that's the best way to approach um, your relationship with others. But again, you got to know your audience, who you're dealing with, your stakeholders, and you go from there.
yeah, yeah. And I love that you mentioned managing expectations because I'm curious actually. Obviously, there's this saying where at work you want to sort of over deliver. That's what I hear a lot. If you want to progress and excel in your particular role, have you ever sort of managed that expectations by sort of lowering the expectations to your manager and then over delivering as a result?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think one of the biggest things that I've tried to do is make sure that he understands exactly what's happening, like just a very brief status update.
Mm,
Um, and in a sense that, yeah, I think that could be interpreted as like, I wouldn't say setting the bar lower, but making sure he understands what the current status is, so that if for some reason things don't go as planned, well, it's not just a bomb I'm going to be dropping on him later. Um, there's kind of a little bit of context as a precursor to whatever's happening. But I think being realistic and expectation setting helps a lot. And likewise, that can be supplemented with, having a good schedule in place.
mm,
Um, in my current role, it is quite technical. So it is a little bit different than my first role as a
right.
design release engineer, in which case, I learned how to make, good schedules in Excel, how to present, how to capture an audience's attention, how long my presentation should be, and then also how to communicate different topics to my manager, just so that it was short, succinct, and he understood exactly what I wanted without having to always get on a call with him or something. Just good communication. So
Mm,
um,
mm, mm.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's general advice.
Gotcha, gotcha. I think minimizing the number of times, minimizing the amount of surprises for your managers, I think is also another, let's say, way to think about it is if anything happens, your
Hmm.
manager should be at least aware of the situation or at least be expecting that this
Hmm.
could happen because you've already set the expectations, because you've already continuously, consistently communicate with your manager. So that's also one thing I've learned, and it's probably a similar thing that you mentioned, Yousef. But
Yep.
is there anything that you would add when it comes to managing this particular uncertain times with COVID, in terms of adapting yourself into such a new situation?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing that I would add is, in a new situation, I guess you can interpret that as starting a new role, starting a new job,
Mhm.
really starting anything new where you have a stakeholder, a manager, professors, other students you're working with, etc. I think the biggest thing is being open-minded, learning who you're going to be working with, and then finding a strong communication style that works for you.
Mm,
I know that each of my managers, the engineers I work with, are different from just in my first role as a design release engineer to a controls engineer now. Um, and one of the biggest things that I've tried to do that I think has been a large help in letting me be effective is like I have a personal communication style that I like, but basically just getting candid feedback from my peers and my manager about how well am I communicating these certain concepts to you? Is there anything that you recommend I change?
mm,
And through that, you'll develop more mutual trust with each other.
sure.
It will help with setting expectations with your manager and your peers and management. But I think it'll make for an overall better experience as that communication exists, and again, there's no surprises or don't feel like you're dropping the ball or getting behind, especially in these times where there's quite a bit of remote work.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's when starting and going on a new journey, I would say one thing that I would add is networking is I think we shouldn't consider as a thing to get jobs or a thing to get things done. Like myself, Yousef and I are doing. We literally haven't met in person before, but here we are, discussing about very interesting topics. And it was just us reaching out, generally wanting to get to know about each other. So I
Yep.
think that idea of thinking about networking as more of a marathon, and it's always a process that you're going to go through, whether you're about to enter the workforce or even after you enter the workforce. Being able to network within the company, for your case it would be GM, and expanding your internal network professionally is very important when trying to get things done, especially at such a global big company. So just wanted to add something over there.
Yep. No, I totally second that thought, Taka. So
Hmm.
thanks
Hmm.
for sharing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to talk also about your volunteering experience, because I think a lot of times candidates neglect or forget the fact that they do have volunteering experience, but they forget to mention it in interviews or, as part of their self-marketing tool. So talk to us about, you worked with Deaf Kids Code.
Yep.
How exactly is the organization? How do they work, and what did you do there?
Absolutely. So Deaf Kids Code is a nonprofit organization.
Hmm.
And I worked on this project in Deaf Kids Code through the ethics program at Purdue. But essentially, this organization, the underlying goal is to um, provide greater resources in STEM for those that are deaf or hard of hearing. Um,
Okay.
I don't know the exact statistics off the top of my head, but I know that um, are significantly underrepresented in the workforce and particularly in tech,
Mm,
whereas it happens to be that many software jobs and engineering jobs are, um, jobs that, many of those deaf and hard of hearing community are able to, actively pursue. There's just a little bit of a lack of representation and resources available. So,
okay.
I totally agree with what you said about, forgetting that. I think, I've met quite a few people that haven't had the opportunity or simply haven't explored those opportunities. So, highly recommend doing that to current college students.
Mm,
But as far as my experience on the team is concerned, I worked on an interdisciplinary small team of engineers that were actually working on an audio pacing device, or sorry, a sensory pacing device for
okay.
a high school swimmer who was actually hard of hearing. So most pacing devices actually have a tuned beep that is, calibratable that they can select. But
Mhm,
we were making a similar device that was waterproof and had all of the safety electronics to basically provide a sensory touch-based pacing device. So that was my experience in the fall of 2019. I
okay.
got to work with a couple mechanical engineers and computer engineers,
Mm,
all in a different point in their academic career. So it was, a really neat opportunity. Didn't get to see the project through to completion as I was a part of that team for a semester, but
Sure.
we made significant progress, and it was great seeing um, the the fruits of my labor continue towards the development of this device, and also have the chance to work with other engineers that were still at certain points in their academic career and still actively learning. So,
Mm.
invaluable experience, and ultimately, it feels good to give back to the community and have that chance to work beyond just academia.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that I notion of giving back is something you feel being able to help others where you are in a fortunate position and you're able to help others through things like volunteering like yourself. It's very not really satisfying, but rather it's such an enriching experience, not just for you, but just thinking about the fact that you're able to make a positive impact on others who are
Yep.
maybe less fortunate or didn't get the chance to do certain things. And for me as well, when I did my Reading Buddies program in the UK, where basically we went every week during our lunch breaks in our internships, we'd go to a local elementary school and read books or play number games to teach them math with the elementary school students. And it's really interesting because not only are you helping them, which makes you want to come back more, but you get to know the kids. And one thing I found is that when you're trying to teach something to someone who has minimal experience, it's very hard to teach someone those concepts because you understand it, and some things like 1 + 1 is 2, right? But how do you explain that to a kid? And so I think another takeaway is to interact with different people in terms of age groups as well as people outside of your profession, to completely different arenas, because that helps you expose yourself to different types of experiences. And where there is new experience, there's always lessons that you can learn, and take away, no matter how young or how old they are. So,
Yep. No, totally agree with that.
and I guess to wrap things up, Yousef, I always ask this question to all the guest speakers. If you
Mhm.
were to go back and restart your college career, is there anything that you would do differently?
So I personally have no regrets.
Perfect.
Really
Amazing.
grateful and content with everything that's happened. I think
Mhm.
you you learn through the good times, and the challenges that you have help build you up. But
Mhm.
I think one of the biggest pieces of advice I would give is, especially for those that aren't super sure about what they want to do, see if you can find a mentor that is perhaps an upperclassman or a professor that you get close to, or really anyone, I guess, perhaps in a prospective field of study, or someone that you think that can help you make more informed decisions. I felt like I was in the dark quite a bit early on in my college career, and I learned through my experiences. But I think finding a mentor at any point, whether it's in college or even early in your professional career,
Mm.
someone who can help guide you and show you the ropes, can be really, really, invaluable in having just a single point of contact that can help perhaps direct you to other individuals as well. So
Yeah.
I think that's my advice. Find a good mentor.
Find a good mentor, absolutely. And I love the fact that you mentioned you don't have any regrets, which we should, I think, all, in a sense, live by.
Mhm.
Whatever decision you make, as long as you made that decision with your, your reasoning of your own, and once you make that decision, you go for it, and whether the outcome is good or bad, I think you shouldn't have any regrets because you decided on your own. And I think that's something that's very important. So thanks for that advice.
Yep, no problem at all.
Awesome. Awesome, Yusuf. For those of you who are interested in what Yusuf is doing personally, or for those of you looking for potentially mentors, I'm sure Yusuf would be down to share with you his experiences, as well as some tips and tricks here and there.
Yep.
So if you don't mind, I'll put your LinkedIn URL in the description below.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Awesome. And so feel free to reach out to him. And Yusuf, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Taka. Take care, stay safe, and we'll be in touch.
Absolutely. Stay safe, everyone. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Ciao.